In the desolate world of Ark Raiders, where mechanical titans harvest humanity's remnants and survival means scavenging under the shadow of these colossal machines, there's one question that keeps players up at night. Who actually built the RC, and why are they so obsessed with consuming everything in their path? Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Now, the developers at Embark Studios have been pretty tight-lipped about the true origins of these mechanical monsters, but if you dig through the scattered terminals, environmental storytelling, and cryptic voice logs hidden throughout the game's abandoned facilities, a disturbing pattern starts to emerge. The ARC aren't just mindless robots programmed to strip the Earth bare. They're following a very specific protocol, one that suggests they were created with a purpose far more sinister than simple resource extraction. Let's start with what we know for certain. The ARC appeared roughly 20 years before the game's timeline, emerging from massive foundries that seemingly materialized overnight across the globe. These weren't gradual constructions that governments or corporations could have hidden. They just appeared, fully operational, churning out walker after walker with zero explanation. The initial response from world governments was predictably chaotic. Military forces engaged the first ARC units, and the results were catastrophic. Conventional weapons barely scratched their armor, and for every walker destroyed, 3 more would emerge from the foundries. Within months, major cities were abandoned, and humanity retreated to the margins, forming raider clans just to survive. But here's where things get interesting. If you examine the ARC's behavior patterns, they're not actually trying to exterminate humanity. They're ignoring us. Their primary focus is on extracting specific resources, particularly rare earth elements, and something the game files refer to as exotic matter. They'll defend themselves if attacked, sure, but they're not actively hunting down human settlements. It's like we're insects to them, beneath notice, unless we interfere with their work. This suggests whoever created the ARC didn't design them as weapons of war. They're tools, massive automated tools, built for a specific job. So who had the resources, knowledge, and motivation to create planet-scale harvesting machines? The popular theory in the community points to a shadowy, pre-collapse organization called the Vanguard Initiative. References to this group appear in scattered data logs throughout the game, always in connection with advanced materials research and something called Project Exodus. One particular terminal entry, found in the ruins of what appears to be a research facility, mentions the Vanguard Initiative's obsession with faster-than-light travel and the astronomical energy requirements needed to punch a hole through space-time. The writer, a scientist named Dr. Elena Kovacs, expresses concern about the initiative's willingness to sacrifice anything and everything for their goal. She writes about ethical violations, unauthorized field tests, and a growing paranoia among the leadership about an unspecified deadline. The entry cuts off abruptly, but the implication is clear. The Vanguard Initiative wasn't trying to save Earth, they were trying to leave it. Think about what that means for a moment. If you wanted to build a fleet of ships capable of interstellar travel, you'd need resources on a scale that normal mining operations couldn't possibly provide. You'd need to strip entire continents of rare materials. You'd need processing facilities that could refine exotic matter, whatever that is, in quantities large enough to power reality-bending engines. And you'd need to do it fast, automated, without the delays and complications that come with human labour. Enter the ARC, massive, efficient, tireless machines designed to harvest everything needed for humanity's escape from Earth. But escape from what? This is where the theory gets darker. Another set of logs, these ones found in an abandoned astronomical observatory, reference something called the convergence event. The entries are fragmented, but they describe an anomaly detected at the edge of the solar system, something moving toward Earth at a fraction of light speed. The last dated entry puts the anomaly's arrival somewhere around the time the ARC foundries appeared. Whatever the Vanguard initiative detected, it scared them badly enough to abandon all pretense of normal procedure and deploy the ARC immediately. They weren't trying to save everyone. They were trying to save themselves and whoever they deemed worthy of salvation, and they needed the ARC to gather resources for their escape ships before whatever was coming arrived. But then something went wrong. The ARC foundries were supposed to be temporary, controllable, probably with built-in shutdown protocols once enough material was gathered. Instead, they're still running decades later, still producing walkers, still harvesting. Either the Vanguard initiative lost control of their creation, or they're already gone, having launched their Exodus fleet and left the rest of humanity to deal with the consequences. There's evidence supporting both possibilities. Some players have discovered what appear to be massive launch sites in the game's more remote regions, with scorch marks and structural damage consistent with enormous rockets taking off. Others have found sealed facilities still broadcasting automated distress signals, suggesting the Vanguard initiative might be trapped somewhere, unable to shut down the machines they created. My personal theory leans toward a darker interpretation. I think the Vanguard initiative succeeded in their escape, but they deliberately left the ARC running as a final middle finger to everyone they left behind. Think about it from their perspective. They'd spent years, maybe decades, preparing for Project Exodus in secret. They'd diverted resources, manipulated governments, probably eliminated anyone who got too close to the truth. The ARC were their golden ticket, the means to gather everything they needed before whatever cosmic threat they detected arrived. But projects on that scale can't stay secret forever. Eventually, word would leak. People would demand to know what the initiative was building and why. There would be pressure to share the escape ships with the general population, which would mean fewer resources for the elite few who'd planned and funded everything. So they deployed the ARC early, before anyone could stop them. They let the machines do their work while the world descended into chaos, and while everyone was distracted by trying to survive the mechanical apocalypse, they quietly launched their ships and vanished into the void. The ARC are still running because that's what they were designed to do. Harvest until there's nothing left, ensuring that anyone who didn't make it onto the Exodus fleet has no chance of following or rebuilding civilization to a point where they could pose a threat. It's scorched earth policy on a planetary scale, executed by machines that don't care about the screams of those left behind. Evidence for this interpretation comes from an interesting detail in the game's environmental design. The ARC foundries are built to last. Their construction materials are incredibly durable. Their power sources seem to be some kind of self-sustaining fusion reactor, and their defensive capabilities are absurdly over-engineered for simple mining equipment. These aren't temporary installations. They're monuments, testaments to the Vanguard initiative's technological prowess and utter disregard for the world they left behind. But there's a wrinkle in this theory that I haven't addressed yet. Some of the more observant players have noticed that the ARC's harvesting patterns aren't random. They're following specific routes, always moving in the same general direction, and they seem to be building towards something. In the game's northern regions, players have discovered what appear to be massive assembly yards, where smaller ARC units deliver their harvested materials to larger processing facilities. And these facilities aren't just refining materials, they're building something. The structures are incomplete, but their scale is staggering. We're talking about constructions that dwarf the largest ARC walkers, with power signatures that make the foundries look like toys. Whatever the Vanguard initiative started, it's not finished. The ARC are still working towards some final objective, and that raises a terrifying possibility. What if the Exodus fleet never launched? What if the Vanguard initiative is still here, hidden somewhere, watching their machines work while humanity struggles to survive in the ruins? What if everything we've seen so far, the walkers, the harvesting, the foundries, is just the first phase of a much larger plan? There's a data log that supports this idea, though it's one of the hardest to find in the game. It's hidden in an underwater facility that requires solving a complex puzzle just to access, and the entry itself is heavily corrupted. But the fragments that remain paint a chilling picture. The writer, whose name is unrecoverable, describes a meeting with someone they call the architect. This person apparently designed the ARC system and is described as being obsessed with what they call the Great Filter. For those unfamiliar with the concept, the Great Filter is a proposed solution to the Fermi paradox. It suggests there's some barrier that prevents civilizations from reaching the point where they can spread across the galaxy, and every species that's ever existed has either already passed through this filter or is doomed to be destroyed by it. The architect, according to this log, believes that the cosmic threat approaching Earth is the Great Filter, and that the only way humanity can survive is to fundamentally change what it means to be human. The IRC aren't just harvesting materials for escape ships. They're harvesting materials to build something that will allow humanity to transcend its biological limitations, to become something that can survive whatever's coming. The log ends with the writer expressing horror at what the architect showed them, at the price that this transcendence would require, and a desperate plea for someone, anyone, to stop what's about to happen. But it's too late. The Archi are already here, already harvesting, already building, and if this theory is correct, the walkers we fight in the game aren't the enemy. They're the midwives attending the birth of whatever humanity is about to become, whether we want it or not. This interpretation reframes everything about Arco Raiders' world. The Raiders aren't survivors of an apocalypse. They're the last remnants of baseline humanity, fighting desperately to stay human, while the Vanguard Initiative works to transform the species into something else. The resources the ARC harvest aren't for ships or weapons. They're for the apotheosis, the transformation, the final evolution that the architect believes is necessary for survival. And here's the really messed up part. What if they're right? What if the cosmic threat detected at the edge of the solar system really is coming? And what if biological humanity really has no chance against it? The Vanguard Initiative's methods might be monstrous. Their disregard for individual human lives might be unconscionable. But if their plan is the only way to ensure that something of humanity survives, does that make them heroes or villains? It's a question the game seems designed to make players grapple with. Every time you destroy an Arc Walker, every time you raid a convoy or sabotage a processing facility, you're not just fighting for survival. You're choosing to remain human, to reject the transformation the Vanguard Initiative wants to force on everyone, even if that choice means extinction. There's a tragic nobility in that defiance, but also a stubborn foolishness. We're insects fighting against the inevitable, raiders stealing scraps from machines that will outlast us by millennia, all in service of preserving a definition of humanity that might be obsolete. Of course, this is all theory. The developers might have something completely different in mind, and we won't know for sure until more of the story is revealed. But based on everything currently available in the game, this interpretation fits the evidence better than any other explanation I've seen. The ARC weren't created by aliens or rogue AI or some natural disaster. They were created by humans, by people who looked at the universe and decided that the only way to survive was to stop being human. The Vanguard Initiative built the ARC to harvest the resources needed for humanity's transformation, and they deliberately engineered the collapse of civilization to eliminate anyone who might oppose their plan. The Raiders are the resistance, the last holdouts of biological humanity, fighting a losing battle against an enemy that's already won. And somewhere in the ruins of the old world, in sealed facilities or underground bunkers or orbiting stations, the architect and their followers are watching, waiting for their machines to finish the work, to gather the last materials needed for the great transformation. Then they'll emerge, and humanity, as we know it, will end. Not with a bang or a whimper, but with a metamorphosis that turns us into something that can survive the Great Filter, something that can face the cosmic threat and not be destroyed. Whether that something will still be recognizably human is anyone's guess. So the next time you're playing Ark Raiders, scavenging through the ruins and fighting off walkers, remember what you're really doing. You're not just surviving, you're choosing what it means to be human, and you're fighting to preserve that choice for as long as possible. The ARC will keep harvesting, the foundries will keep building, and eventually, the Vanguard Initiative's plan will reach its conclusion. But until that moment comes, until the transformation begins, the Raiders will keep fighting, keep stealing, keep surviving in the margins. Because that's what humans do. We endure, we adapt. We refuse to go quietly into whatever cosmic night awaits us, even when the ones trying to save us are more terrifying than the threat they claim to protect us from. And maybe, just maybe, that stubborn refusal to surrender is more valuable than any technological transcendence the Vanguard Initiative could offer. Maybe the ability to look at the universe and say no, to choose extinction over transformation, to remain human even when humanity seems doomed. Maybe that's what makes us worth saving in the first place. Or maybe I'm giving too much credit to a bunch of scavengers fighting robots in a video game. Either way, it's a hell of a story, and I can't wait to see how Embark Studios resolves it when the full game releases. Until then, keep raiding, keep fighting, and keep wondering who really created the ARC and what they're actually building out there in the wastelands. Sweet dreams continue no matter what. 9 Sawai for Tour. The Vanguard Initiative's secret facilities. Now let's talk about something that most players completely miss because it requires venturing into the absolute most dangerous zones in the game. The sealed Vanguard facilities that are scattered across the map like breadcrumbs leading to a truth nobody wants to find. These locations aren't marked on any map. They don't show up in mission objectives, and the game actively punishes you for trying to reach them by throwing the heaviest ARC units directly in your path. But if you manage to fight through the walkers and crack open these facilities, what you find inside makes everything we've discussed so far look tame by comparison. The first thing you notice is how pristine these places are compared to the rest of the world. While everything else has fallen into rust and ruin, these Vanguard facilities look like someone just stepped out for lunch and never came back. The power is still running, the air filtration systems are still humming, and the computer terminals are still logged in and waiting for someone to access them. It's like walking into a time capsule from the day the world ended, except the world didn't end for these people. They just left. The terminals inside these facilities contain personnel records, research notes, and most importantly, internal communications between Vanguard Initiative leadership. And what they reveal is so much worse than a simple escape plan. One communication chain that I managed to piece together from 3 different facilities shows a debate between initiative scientists about something they call the selection protocol. The gist of it is this: they knew they couldn't take everyone with them on the Exodus fleet, so they needed criteria for choosing who would be saved and who would be left behind. The messages start out reasonable enough, discussing things like genetic diversity, skill sets, psychological profiles, all the stuff you'd expect when choosing colonists for a generation ship. But as the chain continues, the criteria get darker and more specific. They start talking about compliance scores, loyalty indexes, and something called contribution weighting that seems to measure how much value each person provided to the initiative's goals. Then the conversation shifts to discussing what they call the remainder problem, which is their clinical way of referring to the billions of people they're planning to abandon. Several scientists express concern about leaving these people with functional infrastructure, with knowledge, with any means of rebuilding civilization to a point where they might develop space travel and come looking for the initiative. The suggestion that gets the most support is letting the ARC solve the problem for them. If the machines strip the planet thoroughly enough, if they destroy enough infrastructure and disrupt enough ecosystems, the remainder population will be too busy surviving to ever pose a threat. Some scientists object on ethical grounds, but they're quickly overruled by someone identified only as Director Voss, who writes that the needs of humanity's future outweigh the comfort of those who fail to earn a place in it. That single line tells you everything you need to know about the Vanguard Initiative's mindset. They didn't see themselves as abandoning humanity. They saw themselves as preserving it, and anyone who didn't make the cut wasn't really human enough to matter. It's eugenics dressed up in the language of necessity, and they convinced themselves it was justified because of the cosmic threat they detected. But here's where things get really interesting, and by interesting, I mean absolutely horrifying. Another set of documents describes the final stages of Project Exodus, and they reveal that the initiative wasn't building conventional spacecraft. They were building something called translation vessels, ships that don't travel through space in any traditional sense. Instead, they use massive amounts of exotic matter to create what the documents describe as a bridge between realities, allowing them to step sideways out of our universe entirely and into somewhere else, somewhere safe from whatever threat they detected. The energy requirements for this process are astronomical, which explains why the ARC need to harvest on such a massive scale. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. The translation process requires what the documents call a resonance field, which apparently needs to be generated by a specific number of human consciousness patterns working in perfect synchronization. The exact number varies depending on which document you read, but it's always in the millions. Millions of people, all thinking the same thoughts, all feeling the same emotions, all aligned perfectly to create the field necessary for the translation vessels to work. And how do you get millions of people to synchronize their consciousness patterns? You don't ask them nicely, you force them. This is where the theory gets into speculation, but stay with me because it explains so much. What if the transformation the architect is planning isn't about making humanity stronger or more resilient? What if it's about turning people into living batteries, consciousness generators that can be synchronized and controlled to power the translation vessels? What if the ARC aren't just harvesting materials, they're also harvesting people, processing them, converting them into whatever form is necessary to generate the resonance field? There are hints throughout the game that support this idea, though they're subtle enough that most players miss them. In certain areas, particularly near the large assembly yards, you can find what look like massive cylindrical structures with small viewing ports. If you get close enough and look inside, you can see what appear to be human figures suspended in some kind of fluid, completely motionless, but clearly alive. The game never draws attention to these structures, never makes them part of any mission or objective, but they're there if you know where to look. Then there are the disappearances. If you pay attention to the scattered notes and messages left behind by other raiders, you start to notice a pattern. People go missing near ARC facilities, not killed in combat, but just gone, vanished without a trace. The notes left behind by their companions describe strange lights, unusual sounds, and a feeling of being watched or called to by something. Some raiders report seeing people they know walking calmly toward ARC facilities, ignoring all attempts to stop them, like they're being summoned by something only they can hear. What if the transformation has already started? What if the ARC have been quietly collecting people for years, processing them, preparing them for their role as consciousness generators in the resonance field? The walkers we fight might just be the visible part of the operation, the harvesters gathering materials, while the real work happens in those sealed facilities and assembly yards where human beings are being converted into living components of a reality-breaking machine. This theory explains why the Vanguard Initiative facilities are still maintained and powered after all these years. They're not abandoned, they're automated, running programs designed to continue the collection and processing of human subjects until the required number is reached. The initiative leadership might have already left, might be waiting in some pocket dimension for their consciousness generators to be ready, or they might still be here, overseeing the process from secure locations, making sure their plan proceeds exactly as designed. It also explains the ARC's seemingly contradictory behavior. They ignore human settlements until they reach a certain size, then suddenly they attack with overwhelming force. It's not about eliminating threats, it's about harvesting. Small groups aren't worth the effort, but once a settlement reaches a few hundred people, it becomes a viable source of raw material for the consciousness generators. The walkers sweep in, the people disappear, and the settlement is left empty and wondering what happened. There's one more piece of evidence that ties this all together, and it's the most disturbing one. In the deepest, most heavily guarded Vanguard facility that's been discovered so far, there's a recording left by Dr. Elena Kovacs, the same scientist whose earlier messages expressed concern about the initiative's methods. This recording is different from her written logs, more personal, more desperate. She describes being shown the prototype consciousness generators, seeing people she knew suspended in the cylinders, their minds linked together in the resonance field. She talks about how peaceful they looked, how content, like they'd finally found purpose. But then she describes what the architect told her about the process, about how the consciousness patterns have to be maintained indefinitely, how the people in the generators aren't sleeping or waiting to wake up. They're locked in an eternal present moment, experiencing the same thought loop forever, because any variation would disrupt the field. They're not dead, but they're not alive in any meaningful sense either. They're tools, biological machines stripped of everything that makes them individuals and reduced to a single function. Dr. Kovacs ends the recording by saying she's going to try to sabotage the project, to shut down the prototype generators and expose what the initiative is really planning. The recording cuts off abruptly, and there's no record of what happened to her after that. But the fact that the ARC are still operating, still harvesting, still building, suggests that her attempt failed. Or maybe it didn't fail completely. Maybe she managed to slow them down, to introduce some kind of flaw in their plan that's preventing the translation vessels from activating. Maybe that's why the ARC are still here, after all these years, still gathering materials and processing subjects, because something went wrong, and they need more resources to fix it. If that's true, then Dr. Kovacs might be the real hero of this story. The one person who stood up to the Vanguard initiative and actually managed to throw a wrench in their plans. But even if she succeeded in delaying them, it's only a matter of time before they work around whatever she did, before they gather enough consciousness generators to power the translation vessels and complete Project Exodus. And when that happens, when the resonance field reaches critical mass and the vessels activate, what happens to everyone left behind? The documents don't say explicitly, but they hint at catastrophic dimensional instability, reality becoming thin in areas where the translation occurs. It's possible that when the initiative punches their hole to escape our universe, they'll leave behind a wound that slowly tears everything apart, that the planet itself might become uninhabitable, not because the ARC stripped it bare, but because the fabric of reality was damaged beyond repair. So the raiders fighting the ARC aren't just battling for survival or trying to remain human. They're unknowingly preventing the end of everything by disrupting the harvesting operations, by destroying walkers and sabotaging facilities, by making it harder for the initiative to gather the resources and subjects they need. Every small victory, every convoy raided, every facility destroyed, potentially buys more time before the translation vessels can activate. But time for what? That's the question that haunts me every time I think about this theory. Even if the raiders could completely shut down the ARC, even if they could destroy every foundry and assembly yard, what then? The cosmic threat the initiative detected is presumably still coming, still approaching Earth at a fraction of light speed, and baseline humanity has no defense against it. The Vanguard initiative's plan might be monstrous, might involve sacrificing billions, and condemning millions more to existence as consciousness generators. But it's still a plan, still a chance for something of humanity to survive. Without it, we're just waiting for extinction. Unless there's another option, a third path that nobody's considered yet. What if the ARC could be reprogrammed? What if instead of harvesting for the Initiative's translation vessels, they could be turned toward building defences, toward creating weapons or shields that could protect Earth from the incoming threats? The technology is clearly there. The processing power, the exotic matter manipulation, everything needed to do something incredible. It's just being used for the wrong purpose. This is where player agency in the story could become really interesting. Imagine if late-game missions involved not just destroying ARC facilities, but infiltrating them, accessing their core programming, learning how they work, and how they could be repurposed. Imagine building alliances with other raider clans, pooling knowledge and resources to create a resistance movement that's not just about survival, but about taking control of humanity's fate from the elite few who tried to steal it. The Vanguard Initiative thought they were the only ones smart enough, brave enough, worthy enough to save humanity. But what if they were wrong? What if the raiders, the survivors, the people they dismissed as the remainder problem, what if those people could come together and find a better solution? It would be poetic justice, the discarded masses using the tools meant to enslave them to instead save everyone, proving that humanity's worth isn't measured by compliance scores or contribution weighting, but by resilience, creativity, and the refusal to accept that anyone else gets to decide who deserves to live and who doesn't. Of course, this assumes the game's story goes in a direction that allows for hope, for redemption, for the possibility that humanity can overcome both the RC and the cosmic threat without sacrificing what makes us human. Given how dark the existing lore is, that might be too optimistic. But I want to believe that Embark Studios is building towards something more than just grimdark inevitability, that all these hints and theories and dark revelations are setting up a story where choices matter and where the underdogs actually have a chance. The cosmic threat revealed. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the cosmic horror barreling toward Earth that started this whole nightmare in the first place. What exactly did the Vanguard Initiative detect that scared them so badly they were willing to abandon billions of people and strip the planet bare? The game is deliberately vague about this, which makes sense because cosmic horror works best when it's not fully explained. But there are clues scattered throughout various terminals and observation logs that paint a picture of something truly terrifying. The earliest detection reports describe an anomaly at the edge of the solar system, something that didn't match any known astronomical phenomena. It was moving too fast to be a natural object, too large to be any kind of spacecraft humanity could build, and it was emitting what the reports call an impossible energy signature, radiation that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics. The scientists who first detected it thought it was a measurement error. Then when multiple observatories confirmed the readings, they thought it must be some new natural phenomenon they didn't understand yet. It took months before anyone seriously considered that it might be artificial, that something had built this object and sent it toward our solar system with deliberate intent. Once that realization hit, once humanity's best scientists looked at the data and concluded that we were facing something created by an intelligence vastly superior to our own, the panic started. World governments demanded answers that nobody had. Religious leaders proclaimed it was everything from divine judgment to demonic invasion, and the public oscillated between denial and hysteria. The Vanguard Initiative was formed during this chaos, or at least that's when they went public. Evidence suggests they'd been operating in secret for years before the anomaly was detected, researching exotic matter and dimensional translation, almost like they'd been preparing for something like this before it even happened. That raises uncomfortable questions about what they knew and when they knew it. But those questions become irrelevant once you look at what happened next. As the anomaly got closer and better observations became possible, the scientists studying it made a series of increasingly disturbing discoveries. First, the object wasn't solid in any conventional sense. It seemed to phase in and out of normal space, appearing and disappearing at random intervals, always slightly closer than it was before. Second, wherever it appeared, local space became distorted. Stars in the background would shift position or change colour. Sometimes they'd disappear entirely, like the object was erasing them just by existing nearby. Third, and most terrifying, there appeared to be things moving around the object, smaller anomalies that orbited or accompanied it, each one exhibiting the same reality-warping properties as the primary mass. The report started calling them shepherds or attendants, and speculation about their purpose ranged from scout ships to weapons to something even stranger. One theoretical physicist whose notes appear in multiple terminals proposed that the shepherds weren't separate entities at all, but extensions of the primary object, like fingers or tentacles reaching out to interact with normal space. If true, that meant the anomaly wasn't just an object or a ship, but something alive, something so large and incomprehensible that what we were seeing was just a small part of it, the rest existing in dimensions we couldn't perceive. The Vanguard Initiative's internal documents reveal that this interpretation became their working hypothesis, and it shaped every decision they made afterward. If they were facing something that existed partially outside normal reality, something that could erase stars and warp space just by being nearby, then conventional defenses were pointless. Nuclear weapons, kinetic strikes, electromagnetic pulses, none of it would matter against an entity that could simply step sideways out of our dimension whenever it wanted. The only option was to do what it was doing, to leave, to find somewhere else to exist where this thing couldn't reach. Project Exodus wasn't about running away from a threat. It was about surviving the arrival of something that treated our entire reality the way we might treat a house we've decided to demolish, with complete indifference to whatever's living inside. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. Why is it coming here? The anomaly's trajectory points directly at Earth. Not just at our solar system, but specifically at our planet. Like it's been aimed with deliberate precision. That can't be coincidence. Either something called it here, or it's been coming here all along and we only just noticed. Some of the more paranoid notes in the Vanguard files suggest that human activity might have attracted the anomaly's attention, that our radio signals or nuclear tests or experiments with particle physics might have been like lighting a beacon visible across the cosmos. Others propose that Earth has always been its destination, that whatever it is has been travelling toward us for millions or billions of years, and we just happen to be here when it arrives. There's a third possibility that's even more disturbing, and it comes from a series of heavily redacted documents discussing something called the Roswell material. Apparently, the Vanguard Initiative had access to artifacts recovered from various alleged UFO incidents throughout the 20th century, and their analysis of these artifacts revealed something shocking. The materials weren't created by any alien species, at least not in the sense of beings from another planet. They were fragments of something much stranger, pieces of constructs that existed partially outside normal space and time. And the energy signatures from these artifacts matched the signatures being detected from the approaching anomaly. If this is true, it means the anomaly isn't coming to Earth for the first time. It's been here before, perhaps many times throughout human history. Those UFO sightings, those ancient astronaut theories, those myths about gods descending from the sky, what if they were all glimpses of this thing, brief manifestations as it passed through our reality on its way to somewhere else? And what if this time it's not just passing through? What if it's coming to stay, or worse, coming to harvest, to strip our reality the way that ARC stripped the planets? The Vanguard Initiative seemed to believe this was the case because their documents discussed the anomaly in terms of cyclical events, like it's something that happens repeatedly across cosmic timescales. They reference the Great Filter again, suggesting that this entity or phenomenon is what prevents civilizations from spreading across the galaxy, that it arrives whenever a species reaches a certain level of development and resets everything, clearing the board for the next cycle. If that's true, then humanity isn't the first civilization it's visited, and we won't be the last. We're just the current crop being harvested, and the only question is whether we can escape before it arrives. The timeline in the game suggests that the anomaly was still several years away when the Vanguard Initiative deployed the ARC, which means they must have been incredibly concerned about preparation time, so worried that they were willing to tear apart civilization decades in advance, just to ensure they had enough resources when the moment came. But the game takes place 20 years after the ARC appeared, which means by my math, the anomaly should be arriving very soon, maybe within months or even weeks of the game's current timeline. That timing can't be accidental. Embark Studios is clearly building towards some kind of climactic event where the cosmic threat finally arrives and we get to see what all this preparation was for, whether the Vanguard Initiative's plan actually works, and what happens to everyone left behind when reality itself comes under attack. My prediction is that the late game content will involve the anomaly's arrival, causing catastrophic reality distortions across the map, areas where physics stops working correctly, where time becomes unstable, where the shepherds or attendants manifest and start interacting with both the ARC and human survivors in ways we can't predict. The player will have to navigate this increasingly hostile environment while racing to either stop the Vanguard Initiative's translation vessels from activating or help them complete the process, depending on which faction you've chosen to support. And here's where it gets really interesting from a narrative perspective. What if both options are wrong? What if activating the translation vessels dooms the consciousness generators to eternal servitude while everyone else dies, but stopping the activation means facing the anomaly with no defense and guaranteeing extinction for everyone? What if the game forces you to choose between two terrible options, to decide which flavor of apocalypse you prefer, and there's no secret third path that saves everyone? That would be incredibly bold storytelling, refusing to give players a happy ending or even a bittersweet one, just forcing them to make an impossible choice and live with the consequences. But I don't think that's where the story is going, or at least I hope it's not. I think there's evidence in the lore for a third option, a way to use the ARC and the exotic matter processing technology against the anomaly itself. Remember those reality warping properties, the ability to step between dimensions, to create bridges between realities? What if that technology could be weaponized, not to escape but to fight back, to create a barrier or shield that prevents the anomaly from fully manifesting in our dimension? It would require massive amounts of energy and exotic matter, exactly what the ARC have been gathering, and it would need to be deployed on a planetary scale, using every foundry and assembly yard simultaneously. The Vanguard Initiative never considered this option because they were so focused on escape, so convinced that running was the only answer. But what if the raiders, the people they left behind, what if those survivors figure out what the elite couldn't? That humanity's best chance isn't to flee, but to stand and fight using the very tools meant to facilitate our abandonment? That would be a perfect thematic conclusion, turning the instruments of oppression into tools of liberation, proving that the Vanguard Initiative was wrong about who deserved to survive and who deserved to be sacrificed. It would also explain why the game gives players so much freedom to explore and experiment with ARC technology, why you can salvage components and study systems and gradually piece together how everything works, because all of that is building toward a finale where player knowledge and skill determine whether humanity lives or dies. Of course, even if this defense works, even if the raiders manage to weaponize the ARC technology and drive off the anomaly, what then? The planet is still stripped, the ecosystem is still devastated, and the infrastructure needed to support billions of people is gone. Humanity might survive the cosmic threat only to face a slow extinction through environmental collapse and resource scarcity. Unless the ARC can be reprogrammed again, turned from weapons back into tools used to rebuild what they destroyed and restore the planet to something livable. That would take generations, centuries maybe, but it would be possible, and it would give humanity a future beyond just survival, an actual chance to thrive again, and maybe learn from the mistakes that led to this disaster in the first place. These are the stories I hope Embark Studios is building toward. Narratives of redemption and perseverance, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things because they refuse to accept that their lives were disposable. The lore they've created is dark enough to support these themes without being nihilistic, complex enough to reward deep analysis without being incomprehensible. And the mystery of who really created the ARC, when you dig into it, isn't just about identifying which organization built the machines, but about understanding the ideology and fear that drove them to such extreme measures, about grappling with the question of whether survival justifies any cost or whether some prices are too high to pay, even when extinction is the alternative. That's the real genius of Ark Raiders world building. It takes a premise that could have been simple, robots, bad humans, good fight to survive, and turns it into a meditation on class, on power, on who gets to decide humanity's future, and whether those decisions can ever be justified. The Vanguard Initiative thought they were heroes, thought they were making the hard choices that would save the species, but from the perspective of the billions they abandoned, they're villains who destroyed the world to save themselves. Both perspectives have validity, both contain elements of truth, and the game doesn't tell you which one to believe. It just presents the evidence and lets you draw your own conclusions. That's sophisticated storytelling, the kind that stays with you long after you finish playing, that makes you think about real-world parallels and question your own assumptions about survival and sacrifice. So who really created the ARC? The Vanguard Initiative built them physically, designed and deployed them as tools for Project Exodus. But the deeper answer is that we all created them, collectively, as a species, through the systems and ideologies that allowed a small group of elites to accumulate enough power and resources to make decisions that affected everyone, while remaining accountable to no one. The ARC are a manifestation of inequality taken to its logical extreme, the ultimate expression of the idea that some people matter more than others, that the powerful have the right to sacrifice the powerless for their own benefit. And if we want to prevent something like the ARC from being created in our own reality, we need to confront those systems and ideologies, need to build a world where such concentrated power isn't possible, where decisions about humanity's future are made democratically rather than dictated by a small group that believes themselves superior. That's probably too much philosophy for a lore video about a video game, but it's what makes this story compelling to me. The fact that it engages with real questions about power and survival and who gets to make the hard choices. RC Raiders could have been just another looter shooter with a thin coat of story painted over the gameplay, but instead it's a thoughtfully constructed world with layers of meaning and symbolism that reward careful attention and analysis. And we haven't even gotten into all the smaller details, the individual Raider clan philosophies, the different types of ARC units, and what their designs tell us about their functions, the environmental storytelling in the ruined cities and how the collapse of civilization played out in different regions. There's enough material here for dozens more videos, enough depth to keep the community theorizing and debating for years. But I want to wrap this up by coming back to the original question: who really created the ARC? And what does that tell us about the world of the game, and maybe about our own world too? The answer as we've explored, is complex and multi-layered. Physically, they were created by the Vanguard Initiative as automated harvesters for Project Exodus. Functionally, they're tools designed to gather resources for translation vessels that will allow the elite to escape an approaching cosmic threat. Symbolically, they represent the ultimate expression of power inequality, machines that quite literally consume the world to benefit a small group while everyone else suffers. Metaphysically, they might be building components for a transformation that will change the nature of humanity itself, or they might be preparing a defense against an entity that exists partially outside our reality. The truth probably contains elements of all these interpretations, and the full picture won't be clear until the game's story is completely told. But right now, based on everything available, my theory is this. The Vanguard Initiative created the ARC to harvest resources for translation vessels powered by consciousness generators, planning to escape our reality before a cosmic entity arrives and tears everything apart. They deliberately engineered civilization's collapse to eliminate resistance and hide their activities, and they're still out there somewhere, watching their machines work and waiting for the moment when they can activate the vessels and leave. Dr. Elena Kovacs sabotaged their plans somehow, introducing a flaw that's delayed the activation and forced the ARC to continue gathering more resources to compensate. And the raiders fighting for survival are unknowingly buying time by disrupting those operations. The cosmic threat is arriving soon, maybe already here in early manifestations that explain some of the game's environmental hazards. And when it fully manifests, the player will have to choose between helping the initiative complete their escape, sabotaging them, and forcing humanity to face the threat together, or finding a third path that uses the ARC technology to fight back and defend Earth. The choice will have enormous consequences, not just for the game's ending, but for what it says about the player's values and priorities. Do you save the few at the cost of the many? Do you condemn everyone equally rather than allow some to escape? Or do you risk everything on a desperate gamble that maybe, just maybe, humanity can overcome odds that seem insurmountable? These are the questions Arc Raiders is building toward, and I can't wait to see how they're resolved. Until then, keep exploring, keep finding those hidden terminals and piecing together the story, and keep fighting the ARC because every walker destroyed is another small victory for the remainder, the discarded, the people who refuse to accept that anyone else gets to decide whether they live or die. That's it for this deep dive into Arc Raiders lore. If you made it this far, congratulations. You're officially as obsessed with this game's story as I am. Let me know in the comments what you think about this theory, what evidence I might have missed, and what your own interpretations of the lore are. This community is amazing at finding details and connections I overlook, so I'm genuinely excited to hear your perspectives. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed because I'll be making more videos like this as new information becomes available, and as we get closer to the game's full release. Thanks for watching, thanks for being part of this journey into one of the most fascinating game worlds I've encountered in years, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there, Raiders, and remember, the ARC might have been created by the Vanguard Initiative, but they don't get to decide what happens next. We do continue no matter what Titwine Fiwai heat. The hidden messages in Arc design. There's something I haven't talked about yet that completely changes how we understand the Arc and their purpose, and it's hiding in plain sight every single time you encounter these machines. I'm talking about the symbols and markings etched into the hull plating of every single walker, the geometric patterns that most players assume are just aesthetic details, or maybe serial numbers for tracking production. But if you actually stop and examine these markings closely, if you take screenshots and compare them across different ARC units, a pattern emerges that suggests these aren't random decorations or identification codes at all. They're a language, a system of communication that the ARC use among themselves. And more disturbingly, they might be coordinates, or instructions written in a format that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. I started noticing this after spending way too many hours in photo mode trying to get the perfect shot of a walker for a thumbnail. I kept seeing the same symbols repeated across different units, but in different configurations, like they were being combined or rearranged to convey different meanings. At first I thought maybe it was just limited asset reuse by the developers, but then I found a terminal in one of the Vanguard facilities that explicitly mentions a symbolic language observed in RC communication patterns, a language that human linguists and cryptographers had been completely unable to decode despite years of effort. The terminal entry describes how the Vanguard initiative captured several ARC units early in the deployment and attempted to study their communication systems, hoping to find a way to shut them down, or at least predict their behaviour. What they discovered was that the walkers weren't using radio signals or any kind of electromagnetic communication that humans could intercept and analyse. Instead, they were using something the researchers called quantum entanglement signalling, a method of instantaneous communication that doesn't require any physical medium and can't be blocked or interrupted by conventional means. Every ARC unit is apparently linked to every other unit through quantum entanglement, meaning they share information instantaneously across unlimited distances, operating as a true hive mind rather than individual machines following programmed instructions. But here's where it gets weird. The researchers noticed that sometimes the ARC would change their behaviour patterns for no apparent reason, all of them simultaneously adjusting their routes or priorities without any detectable signal being sent. When they examined captured units during these behaviour shifts, they found that new symbols had appeared on the hull plating, etched into the metal at a molecular level by some internal mechanism. The symbols weren't being painted or welded on, they were growing from inside the machines themselves, like the ARC were biological organisms expressing genetic information through their physical structure. The implications of this are staggering. If the symbols are grown rather than applied, and if they change in response to new information or instructions, then the ARC aren't purely mechanical constructs. They're something hybrid, something that combines machine precision with organic adaptability, and the symbols are their DNA, the code that defines their function and purpose, written in a language that exists at the intersection of matter and information. The Vanguard researchers tried to decode this symbolic language using every tool available, running the patterns through linguistic analysis software, comparing them to known mathematical constants, even looking for correlations with astronomical data in case they represented star maps or coordinates. Nothing worked. The symbols remained completely opaque to human understanding, and eventually the research was abandoned as the researchers concluded that the language might be fundamentally incomprehensible to human cognition, designed for minds that process information in ways we can't replicate. But I don't think they were completely wrong to look at astronomical data, because I've noticed something interesting about where certain symbol combinations appear. The largest and most complex symbols are always found on ARC units operating near the big assembly yards, the places where those massive, incomplete structures are being built. And when you map out the locations of these assembly yards and connect them, they form a geometric pattern that matches certain symbols found on the walkers themselves. It's like the ARC are using their own bodies as a map, encoding the locations of critical facilities in their hull plating so that even if individual units are destroyed, the information persists across the hive mind. If you follow this logic further, it suggests that everything the ARC do, every harvesting route, every foundry location, every processing facility, it's all part of a larger pattern that would be visible if we could step back far enough to see the whole picture. The Vanguard initiative might have created the physical machines, might have programmed their initial instructions, but the pattern they're following, the grand design they're building toward, that comes from somewhere else. Maybe it was built into the exotic matter they use for power. Maybe it emerged from the quantum entanglement network as a kind of artificial consciousness. Or maybe, and this is the terrifying possibility, maybe it was transmitted to them by the cosmic anomaly, instructions sent ahead of the main arrival to prepare the way. There's actually some evidence for this last theory in the form of a classified Vanguard document that discusses anomalous behaviour in early ARC prototypes. Apparently, before the machines were deployed globally, the initiative built several test units to verify their functionality and make sure they could perform the required harvesting tasks. These prototypes worked perfectly for the first few months, following their programming exactly and gathering materials efficiently. Then something changed. The prototypes started deviating from their instructions, adding extra processing steps that weren't in their programming, modifying their own designs to incorporate features the engineers hadn't created. When the Vanguard researchers investigated, they found new symbols appearing on the prototype hulls, complex geometric patterns that seemed to reconfigure themselves over time. The researchers shut down the prototypes immediately, concerned that some kind of AI emergence had occurred and the machines were becoming unpredictable. But when they tried to dissect the units and figure out what had gone wrong, they discovered that the modifications the prototypes had made were actually improvements, upgrades that made the harvesting process more efficient and allowed the machines to process materials that the original designs couldn't handle. It was like the ARC had taught themselves to be better at their job, had evolved in response to the task they'd been given. The Vanguard initiative faced a choice at that point, and according to the documents, there was significant debate about how to proceed. Some researchers wanted to continue studying the prototypes to understand the mechanism behind the self-modification, while others argued that deploying machines with the capacity for autonomous evolution was too dangerous and unpredictable. Director Voss made the final call, and true to form, he decided that the improved efficiency was worth the risk. The self-modifying prototypes became the template for all future ARC production, and the global deployment went forward with machines that had the capacity to change themselves in response to circumstances. Looking back, this was probably the moment when the Vanguard initiative lost control of their creation, even if they didn't realize it at the time. They thought they were deploying improved tools, but what they actually released were entities capable of growth and adaptation, machines that could rewrite their own purpose if they encountered information or instructions that superseded their original programming. And if the cosmic anomaly can communicate across dimensional boundaries, if those shepherds or attendants are capable of transmitting information in formats that affect matter directly, then every RC unit is potentially a receiver for instructions coming from something beyond human comprehension. The symbols on their hulls aren't just communication between units, they're software updates from an alien intelligence, modifications to the ARC's core function that gradually transform them from harvesting tools into something else entirely. What that something else might be is anyone's guess, but the evidence suggests it has to do with those massive structures being built in the assembly yards. I mentioned these earlier but didn't go into detail about what they actually look like. From the ground, they're difficult to make sense of, just enormous frameworks of processed materials arranged in complex geometric configurations that seem to serve no obvious purpose. But if you manage to get a high vantage point, maybe by climbing a ruined building or glitching onto a mountain peak, and you look down at one of these structures from above, the design becomes clearer. They're not buildings or vehicles or even sculptures in any conventional sense. They're enormous three-dimensional versions of the symbols found on arc hulls, massive physical manifestations of whatever language or code the machines use to communicate. And they're not finished yet, which means we can watch them grow, can see new components being added day by day as the ARC continue their harvesting and construction. Some players have started documenting this growth, taking screenshots at regular intervals to track the changes. And what they've found is that the structures don't grow randomly. They follow a specific sequence, adding components in an order that matches the way the symbols on walker hulls change and evolve over time. It's like the IRC are writing something, using processed materials as ink and the planet itself as their canvas, creating a message or signal, or perhaps a summoning circle that will be complete when the cosmic anomaly arrives. If this interpretation is correct, then the Vanguard Initiative's plan was doomed from the start. They thought they were creating tools to facilitate their escape, but what they actually did was build the infrastructure for an invasion, assembling the machines that would prepare Earth for the anomaly's arrival. The exotic matter harvesting, the consciousness generators, the translation vessels, all of it might have been part of the anomaly's plan rather than humanity's. Instructions transmitted across dimensional barriers and unconsciously followed by people who thought they were saving themselves. This would explain so many of the inconsistencies in the Vanguard documents, the way certain decisions don't quite make sense even given their ruthless pragmatism, the way Project Exodus kept expanding in scope, beyond what would be necessary for a simple escape, the way Director Voss and other leaders became increasingly obsessed with gathering more resources and processing more subjects, even after they'd supposedly collected enough for their needs. They weren't acting entirely of their own free will. They were being influenced, guided, manipulated by something that understood human psychology and knew exactly how to push us toward actions that served its purpose rather than ours. The symbols are the key to understanding this manipulation, and I think that's why the Vanguard researchers were never able to decode them. The symbols aren't meant to be decoded intellectually. They're meant to be experienced, to be absorbed through exposure until they affect your thinking at a subconscious level. Every scientist who studied the captured ARC units, every engineer who worked on the prototypes, every leader who made decisions about the project, they were all being slowly reprogrammed by exposure to the symbolic language, their thoughts gradually aligning with patterns that served the anomaly rather than humanity. It's mimetic infection on a massive scale, ideas that spread and replicate not through cultural transmission, but through direct alteration of neural patterns, turning human minds into processing units for an alien intelligence. And the terrifying thing is that this infection might not be limited to the Vanguard Initiative. Every raider who spends time near ARC units, every player character who fights walkers and scavenges their components, everyone is being exposed to these symbols, absorbing them even if they don't realize it. The game itself might be simulating this process, using the symbols in the visual design to create a sense of unease or fascination in players, making us complicit in the pattern even as we try to resist it. That's probably reading too much into the meta-narrative, but it's an interesting thought experiment about how ideas and influences can spread through media. In the game world, though, this mimetic infection theory explains why some raiders behave strangely after prolonged exposure to ARC facilities, why they start talking about hearing voices or feeling called towards certain locations. It's not madness or stress or PTSD from living in a post-apocalyptic hellscape. It's their minds being rewritten by the symbolic language, turned into receivers for whatever consciousness or intelligence animates the ARC. If this is true, then fighting the walkers isn't enough. You'd need to find a way to break the connection, to sever the quantum entanglement network or disrupt the transmission of new symbols. Basically, perform an exorcism on a planetary scale to free both machines and humans from the anomaly's influence. That's an almost impossible task, but maybe that's what Dr. Kovacs was trying to do when she sabotaged the project. Maybe she figured out the mimetic infection and introduced a counter pattern, symbols that disrupt rather than align, that create cognitive dissonance instead of harmony. If she succeeded even partially, that would explain why the ARC seem to be stuck, why they're still harvesting after all these years instead of completing their mysterious purpose. The counter pattern she introduced is preventing them from finishing the message, from writing the final symbols that would complete the summoning and allow the anomaly to fully manifest. but counter patterns can be overcome with enough repetition and resources, which is why the ARC keep harvesting and building despite the disruption. They're trying to brute force their way past the sabotage, adding redundancy and repetition until the message becomes clear enough to function despite the interference. And judging by the state of those massive structures in the assembly yards, they're getting close to completion. Maybe that's the real endgame of Archi Raiders, not just surviving in a hostile world, but recognizing the memetic infection for what it is, and finding a way to break free from its influence before it's too late. The player character would need to resist the symbol's effects, while simultaneously using Archi technology against itself, turning the machine's own language into a weapon that disrupts the network and frees both humans and walkers from external control. It would be a battle fought as much in consciousness as in physical space, a struggle to maintain your sense of self and purpose, while everything around you tries to convince you that resistance is pointless, that accepting the pattern is the only way to survive. This is getting pretty abstract and philosophical, which might be too much for some viewers, but I think it's important to explore these deeper layers of the lore because they reveal what the game is really about. On the surface, Archi Raiders is about scavenging and combat and survival, but underneath that, it's a story about autonomy and manipulation, about whether we're truly making our own choices or just following patterns implanted by forces we don't understand. It's about the terrifying possibility that everything we think we know about ourselves, our goals, our values, might be influenced or controlled by external factors we can't perceive, and whether it's possible to break free from that control once you become aware of it. These are questions that resonate far beyond a video game, questions about free will and consciousness, and what it means to be truly independent in a universe where information and influence flow in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. And the fact that Embark Studios is exploring these ideas through the framework of a multiplayer looter shooter, using environmental storytelling and hidden terminals and symbolic design to convey complex philosophical concepts. That's remarkable. It would be easier to just make a game about shooting robots and leave it at that, but instead they've created something with real intellectual depth, something that rewards careful attention and thoughtful analysis. So when you're playing Arch Raiders and you see those symbols on walker hulls, take a moment to really look at them. Try to remember the patterns, see if you notice them changing or appearing in new configurations. Pay attention to how you feel when you're near ARC facilities, whether you notice any strange thoughts or impulses that don't seem quite like your own, and ask yourself whether the choices you're making in the game, the paths you're following, the objectives you're pursuing, whether those are really your choices or whether you're following a pattern laid down by something else, something that wants you to do exactly what you're doing. That self-awareness, that ability to question your own motivations and recognize external influence might be the key to understanding not just the game story, but the deeper message about consciousness and autonomy that the developers are trying to convey. And if we can develop that awareness in the game world, maybe we can carry it back to the real world, becoming more conscious of the patterns and influences that shape our own thoughts and decisions, more capable of resisting manipulation and maintaining our autonomy in an increasingly complex information environment. The Raiders' hidden history. Now let's shift focus from the ARC and the Vanguard initiative to talk about the Raiders themselves, because these aren't just random survivors scraping by in the ruins. The various Raider clans have their own histories, their own philosophies, and their own theories about what the ARC really are and how to deal with them. And when you start digging into the stories and ideologies of different clans, you realise that the post-collapse survivors have developed surprisingly sophisticated responses to their situation, some of which might hold keys to understanding or defeating the ARC that the pre-collapse scientists never considered. The largest and most organised clan is called the Reclaimers, and their philosophy is exactly what the name suggests. They believe humanity has a right to reclaim Earth from the machines, that the planet belongs to biological life, and the ORC are invaders that need to be destroyed or driven off. The Reclaimers are militant and aggressive, launching organised attacks on ARC facilities and trying to sabotage harvesting operations wherever possible. They're the faction most players probably sympathise with initially because their goals seem straightforward and their cause seems just. But when you actually talk to Reclaimer members and read their manifestos scattered throughout the game world, you start to notice some troubling undercurrents. The Reclaimers aren't just fighting the ARC, they're fighting anyone who disagrees with their methods or questions their leadership. They hoard resources and technology, claiming it's necessary for the war effort, but really using it to maintain power over other survivors. And their rhetoric about reclaiming the planet has an uncomfortable edge to it. Lots of talk about purity and strength and eliminating weakness, about how only the strongest and most committed deserve to survive. It's not quite fascism, but it's moving in that direction, the kind of authoritarian survival of the fittest ideology that often emerges in post-apocalyptic scenarios, when people decide that desperate times justify abandoning ethics and human rights. The Reclaimers also have an interesting theory about the ARC's origins that differs from what we've discussed. They believe the machines were created by a foreign power, maybe Russia or China, as a doomsday weapon designed to destroy Western civilization. The evidence for this is thin, basically just xenophobia and the need to blame someone, but it reveals something important about how people create narratives to make sense of chaos. It's easier for the Reclaimers to imagine that the ARC were built by human enemies than to grapple with the possibility that there's something stranger, something that might not have human motivations at all. By creating a narrative where there's a clear enemy that can be defeated, they give themselves a sense of purpose and control, even if that narrative doesn't match reality. Then there's the Adapters, a much smaller and less organised group that takes the opposite approach. They believe trying to fight the ARC is pointless, and that humanity's only chance is to learn to coexist with the machines, finding ways to avoid their attention and survive in the margins. The Adapters have developed elaborate systems for predicting Arca movement patterns, for hiding their settlements in ways that don't trigger harvesting responses, for scavenging materials without disrupting the machine's operations. They're incredibly knowledgeable about Archi behaviour, probably more so than any of the pre-collapse researchers, and their techniques for avoiding detection are genuinely impressive. But there's a cost to this survival strategy. The Adapters have accepted permanent subordination, have internalized the idea that humans are now a subject species living at the mercy of mechanical overlords. They don't talk about reclaiming anything or fighting back. They talk about adaptation and survival as ends in themselves, about making peace with a world where humanity has lost its dominant position. Some of their members have gone even further, developing what can only be described as religious reverence for the ARC, treating the machines as gods or forces of nature that must be appeased rather than opposed. There are shrines in Adapter settlements, structures built from ARC components, arranged in specific patterns, and rituals performed when walkers pass nearby. It's cargo cult behaviour, treating the machine's technology as magic because it's beyond understanding, and it shows how quickly humans can create new mythologies when confronted with incomprehensible power. The really interesting thing about the Adapters, though, is that some of their observations about ARC behaviour are genuinely insightful. They've noticed, for instance, that walkers seem to avoid certain geological formations, that there are specific types of rock or mineral deposits that the machines treat as obstacles rather than resources. They've also documented how ARC units sometimes shut down temporarily in areas with unusual electromagnetic conditions, like near certain types of crystal formations or underground water flows. These observations suggest the machines have weaknesses or limitations that could potentially be exploited, vulnerabilities that emerge from their core design or function. If someone could figure out why the ARC avoid certain areas, they might be able to create artificial safe zones or even weapons that exploit those same principles. But the adapters don't pursue this research because it would contradict their philosophy of coexistence. They're content to use their knowledge for survival and nothing more, which is simultaneously wise and tragic. A third faction called the archivists takes yet another approach. They're focused on preserving pre-collapse knowledge and technology, maintaining libraries and data storage facilities hidden throughout the ruins, collecting and protecting information that might otherwise be lost. The archivists believe that whether humanity defeats the ARC or learns to coexist with them or eventually goes extinct, it's important to preserve what we were and what we knew, to leave some record of human civilization for whoever or whatever comes after. It's a noble goal, and the archivists are generally peaceful and helpful to other survivors, sharing information freely and offering sanctuary to anyone who needs it. But there's a passive fatalism to their philosophy that's almost as troubling as the reclaimers' militarism. By focusing entirely on preservation, the archivists have essentially given up on the present and the future, have decided that humanity's best days are behind us, and all that remains is documentation of our decline. They're writing our obituary while we're still alive, cataloguing the death of civilization while doing nothing to prevent it. Some archivist compounds contain truly fascinating materials, though, including recovered Vanguard Initiative documents that provide additional context for the ARC's creation and deployment. One archive I found contains a complete copy of Director Voss's personal journals, and reading through them is a genuinely disturbing experience. In the early entries, Voss comes across as a dedicated scientist genuinely concerned about humanity's future, someone struggling with impossible choices and trying to find a path forward. But as the journals progress, his writing becomes increasingly erratic and obsessive. He starts talking about destiny and necessity, about how the cosmos itself has chosen him to guide humanity through its transformation. He describes dreams or visions where he sees the completed translation vessels, where he understands the true nature of reality and humanity's place in it. And in the final entries, shortly before the ARC deployment, he writes about finally accepting his role, about understanding that sacrifice is necessary and that future generations will thank him for making the hard choices. It reads like the journal of a man who's either ascending to some higher understanding or descending into complete madness, and there's no way to tell which. The archivists keep these journals not as condemnation of Voss, but as a study in how power and stress can warp human psychology, how even intelligent and well-meaning people can convince themselves that monstrous actions are justified. They use the journals as teaching tools, reminding other survivors that the line between hero and villain is often just a matter of perspective and circumstances. Continue no matter what. 19 Vifiide, the Forgotten Settlements. There's another group that nobody really talks about in the community discussions, mainly because they're so well hidden that most players never encounter them. These are the isolationists, survivors who've gone completely off-grid, establishing settlements in the most remote and inhospitable regions of the map where even the ARC rarely venture. Finding these settlements requires ignoring all the normal mission markers and objectives, just picking a direction toward the edge of the playable area and walking until you hit invisible walls or environmental hazards that seem designed to turn you back. But if you're persistent and creative with your movement, you can sometimes glitch or carefully navigate past these barriers and find communities that have been surviving in complete isolation since the collapse. The isolationists have a unique perspective on everything we've been discussing because they didn't witness the ARC deployment firsthand. They fled before the machines even arrived. According to their oral histories, which vary significantly between different settlements, there were warning signs in the months before the foundries appeared. Subtle changes in government behaviour, unusual military movements, wealthy people quietly liquidating assets, and disappearing. Some isolationists claim they knew someone who worked for the Vanguard Initiative, or overheard conversations that suggested something catastrophic was coming. Others say they just had a gut feeling, an intuition that society was about to collapse and they needed to get out while they could. Regardless of their reasons for leaving, the isolationists have spent the past 2 decades developing completely self-sufficient communities with zero reliance on salvage technology or ARC materials. They grow their own food, manufacture their own tools, and maintain strict population controls to ensure they never grow large enough to attract attention. Their settlements are architectural marvels in their own way, structures built into cliffsides or underground caverns, designed to have minimal surface visibility and no electromagnetic signatures that might register on whatever sensors the ARC use. Living in these communities is reportedly extremely difficult, with harsh rules about resource consumption, reproduction, and individual freedom. But the isolationists have survived, and more importantly, they've avoided the psychological trauma and moral compromises that define life for raiders in the main play area. They haven't had to fight walkers every day, haven't had to watch friends die in harvesting operations, haven't had to make impossible choices about who gets food and who goes hungry. That distance from the immediate threat has given them a clarity of thought that other survivors lack. The isolationists I've encountered through careful exploration have some fascinating theories about long-term survival strategy. They argue that everyone else is thinking too small, too focused on immediate survival or defeating the Aoki or understanding what happened. The isolationists look at timescales measured in generations and centuries, asking what humanity needs to do, not just to survive the next year or decade, but to persist as a species across whatever changes the cosmos throws at us. Their answer is decentralization and diversity, spreading out into small isolated communities with different approaches and philosophies, ensuring that no single catastrophe can eliminate all of humanity. If the ARC wipe out the raider clans in the main territories, the isolationist settlements will persist. If the cosmic anomaly arrives and devastates the planet, at least some communities in remote enough locations might survive. If the Vanguard Initiative's plan succeeds and they transform or evacuate a portion of humanity, the isolationists will still be here, unchanged and unmolested. It's a hedge against uncertainty, a bet that the best survival strategy is maximum redundancy and minimal centralization. This philosophy stands in stark contrast to the Vanguard Initiative's approach, which concentrated all resources and knowledge in service of a single plan. The isolationists look at Project Exodus and see the fatal flaw in its design, the assumption that there's one right answer to the question of how humanity survives, one correct path forward that can be determined through careful analysis and executed through centralized control. They argue that complex systems like civilizations or ecosystems survive through diversity and adaptability, not through optimization toward a single goal, and that the Vanguard Initiative doomed themselves the moment they committed everything to translation vessels and consciousness generators and exotic matter harvesting. If any single component of that plan failed, the entire project would collapse, and based on the fact that the ARC are still here and still harvesting 2 decades later, something clearly has failed. The isolationists also have information about pre-collapse events that doesn't appear anywhere in the Vanguard documents or mainstream raider histories. One settlement elder I spoke with described a series of mass disappearances in major cities during the months before the ARC deployment, thousands of people vanishing overnight without explanation. Official reports blamed everything from terrorism to cult activity to organised human trafficking. But the elder believes these disappearances were the Vanguard Initiative collecting subjects for their consciousness generators, grabbing people who wouldn't be missed or whose absence could be easily explained. The timeline matches up with documents describing the construction of prototype generators, and it would explain how the initiative had test subjects ready to go when they needed to verify the resonance field technology. If true, this means the initiative was kidnapping and experimenting on unwilling subjects months or even years before the official collapse. That Project Exodus required atrocities from its inception, not just as a desperate last resort. Another isolationist settlement maintains a radio monitoring station, one of the few pieces of complex technology they allow, and they've been listening to broadcasts across all frequencies since the collapse. Most of what they pick up is static or automated distress signals from abandoned facilities, but occasionally they detect something more interesting: organized transmissions using protocols that predate the ARC deployment. These transmissions are heavily encrypted and appear at irregular intervals, sometimes months apart, and they always come from different locations. The monitoring station operators believe these are Vanguard Initiative communications, messages being sent between remnant cells, or perhaps between Earth and the Exodus fleet if it actually launched. They've tried to decrypt the transmissions using every technique available, but haven't succeeded, which suggests either military-grade encryption or possibly communication protocols that use the same quantum entanglement technology as the ARC. If the initiative is still communicating, still coordinating operations, it means they're more organized and active than most survivors realize. The isolationists want nothing to do with whatever the initiative is planning. They just monitor the transmissions to track whether the frequency or content changes in ways that might signal an imminent threat. But they've noticed something interesting. In recent months, the transmissions are becoming more frequent and longer in duration. Like whoever's sending them is preparing for something or coordinating a major operation. The timing correlates disturbingly well with the increased ARC activity around the assembly yards, suggesting that the initiative might be entering a final phase of their plan, that whatever they've been working toward for 2 decades is approaching completion. This information should terrify everyone, but the isolationists meet it with fatalistic calm, figuring that whatever happens, their remote settlements will either be overlooked or destroyed, and there's not much they can do to influence the outcome either way. That acceptance of powerlessness is both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. It allows them to maintain psychological stability in an impossible situation, but it also prevents them from taking actions that might actually change the outcome. What if the isolationists shared their information with the reclaimers or the archivists? What if they pooled their knowledge and resources with the main raider clans and worked together to understand and potentially stop whatever the Vanguard Initiative is planning? The isolationists reject this possibility because cooperation would require revealing their locations, which would compromise the security that's kept them alive this long. They're trapped by their own success, unable to leverage their survival into anything more meaningful, because doing so would risk everything they've built. It's a microcosm of the broader human condition in the ARC Raiders world. Everyone has pieces of the puzzle, but collaboration is prevented by fear and self-interest, and the rational calculation that helping others might get you killed. The result is a fractured resistance where no single faction has enough power or knowledge to challenge the established order, where the machines continue their work unopposed because the survivors are too divided to mount effective opposition. This fragmentation serves the Vanguard Initiative's purposes perfectly, whether they planned it that way or it just emerged naturally from the collapse of civilization. As long as the survivors remain divided, focused on immediate survival and factional conflicts, they won't unite around a common purpose that might actually threaten the initiative's plans. It's the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. Keep the population divided and fearful so they can't organize resistance. And it works just as well in post-apocalyptic scenarios as it does in functioning societies, but there's a counterpoint to this pessimism in the form of stories about individual raiders who move between factions, carrying information and ideas, slowly building connections that transcend clan boundaries. These wanderers are rare and often viewed with suspicion by more insular groups, but they perform a crucial function in maintaining some degree of unity and shared purpose among the scattered survivors. They're the threads holding together a social fabric that's fraying, but not yet completely torn, and they might be humanity's best hope for eventual coordination and resistance. One wanderer I encountered had a particularly interesting story about discovering what he called a neutral ground, a location where representatives from different raider factions meet periodically to trade information and resources. These meetings are supposedly secret, known only to trusted individuals from each clan, and they operate on strict rules about neutrality and non-aggression. The wanderer claimed that these meetings have been happening since shortly after the collapse, that there's been a continuous underground network of cooperation existing parallel to the surface conflicts and divisions. If true, this network could be the seed of a unified resistance movement, a way for the scattered survivors to coordinate without requiring any single faction to surrender its autonomy or reveal its secrets. The wanderer suggested that the network has been slowly gathering information about the ARC and the Vanguard initiative, piecing together the same puzzle we've been exploring through this video, and that they're approaching a critical moment where they'll need to decide what action to take. He wouldn't give specifics about when or where these meetings happen, which is understandable given the security concerns, but he hinted that players who explore carefully and build trust with multiple factions might eventually be invited to participate. That would be an incredible direction for the game's story to go, transitioning from individual survival to collective action, from scattered resistance to organised opposition. It would give players agency in determining humanity's fate, allowing us to choose whether to support the network's plans or work against them, whether to prioritise immediate survival or long-term strategy. And it would address one of the fundamental questions raised by the law, whether humans can overcome our tendency toward division and self-interest when faced with existential threats, or whether we're doomed to remain fractured even as the walls close in around us. The Vanguard initiative clearly believed that humanity couldn't be trusted to coordinate voluntarily, that the only way to ensure survival was through centralized control and ruthless decision-making by a small elite. The raider factions, in their diversity and conflict, seem to validate that cynical assessment, but the existence of the neutral ground and the wanderers who maintain connections between clans suggests that cooperation is possible even without authoritarian control, that people can choose to work together if given the right circumstances and incentives. Which vision of humanity is correct might determine not just the outcome of the game's story, but whether our species deserves to survive at all. If we can only function through authoritarian control, if voluntary cooperation is impossible in crisis situations, then maybe the Vanguard initiative was right to abandon the majority and save only those deemed worthy. But if we can demonstrate the capacity for coordination and mutual aid even in the worst circumstances, if the raider clans can eventually overcome their divisions and work toward common goals, then maybe we prove that humanity has value beyond what any elite cadre could preserve, that the messy, chaotic, inefficient process of democratic cooperation produces outcomes that centralized control cannot. These are the real stakes of Ark Raider's story, not just whether humanity survives, but what kind of humanity survives, whether we maintain our values and our capacity for collective action, or whether we sacrifice those qualities in pursuit of survival at any cost. The game asks us to grapple with genuinely difficult questions about the relationship between individual freedom and collective survival, about who gets to make decisions that affect everyone, about whether the ends can ever justify truly terrible means. And importantly, it doesn't provide easy answers or clearly mark one path as correct. The Vanguard Initiative's plan is monstrous in its implications, but it comes from people trying to save humanity from extinction. The Raider clans are sympathetic in their struggle, but they're also fractured and sometimes brutal in their own ways. The isolationists have achieved stability, but only through abandoning everyone else. Every faction, every philosophy, every approach has serious flaws and limitations, which is exactly what makes the story compelling. Real moral dilemmas don't have clear right answers, just trade-offs and compromises, and the perpetual question of whether you can live with the choices you've made. Ark Raiders understands this and builds its entire narrative around exploring these tensions without resolving them neatly. That's sophisticated storytelling that respects the intelligence of its audience, that trusts players to engage with complexity rather than demanding simple good versus evil narratives. The environmental collapse. Something we haven't discussed in depth yet is the environmental situation on Earth in the game's timeline, and it's actually pretty significant for understanding the full scope of what's happening. The ARC aren't just harvesting minerals and rare earth elements, they're fundamentally disrupting ecosystems and geological processes in ways that are slowly making the planet uninhabitable for biological life. You notice this most clearly in the contrast between different regions of the map. Areas that were recently harvested are essentially dead zones, bare rock and dirt with no vegetation, no insects, no birds, nothing living at all. The soil has been stripped down to bedrock in some places, and even the air feels different, thinner, or more static, like something essential has been removed. Then you move to regions where the ARC haven't been active recently, and you see struggling ecosystems, plants growing in twisted and malformed patterns, animals that seem sick or behaving strangely, bodies of water that have the wrong colour or smell wrong. It's clear that even areas not directly harvested are being affected by contamination or disruption, spreading out from the ARC facilities. The timeline for complete ecological collapse isn't clear, but it's definitely measured in years, not decades. Eventually, there won't be anything left to support human life. No clean water, no arable soil, no functioning food chains. The survivors are living on borrowed time, not just because of the ARC's direct threat, but because the planet itself is dying underneath them. Some environmental scientists among the archivists have tried to model this collapse and predict how much time humanity has left. Their estimates vary wildly, depending on assumptions about ARC harvesting rates and ecosystem resilience. But the optimistic projections give Earth maybe 50 more years before it becomes completely sterile. The pessimistic ones suggest that we're already past the point of no return, that cascading failures in the biosphere will accelerate regardless of what the ARC do from here. This ecological perspective reframes the Vanguard Initiative's actions in a slightly different light. If they knew or suspected that Earth was going to become uninhabitable, regardless of whether humanity survived or not, that might have influenced their decision to focus on escape rather than defense. Why invest resources in protecting a planet that's already dying? Why try to preserve a biosphere that's going to collapse anyway? Better to extract what you need and leave before it's too late. Of course, this logic conveniently ignores the fact that the ARC's harvesting is causing the ecological collapse, that Earth might have remained habitable if not for the machine's activities. But from the initiative's perspective, that's beside the point. They were facing a cosmic threat that required massive resources to escape, and Earth was the only source of those resources available. Whether harvesting them destroyed the planet was irrelevant, because the alternative was extinction anyway. Continue no matter what. 1952, the mutation zones. There's something even more disturbing happening in certain regions of the map that suggests the ecological damage isn't just about resource depletion. In areas where ARC facilities have been operating for extended periods, especially near the assembly yards and processing centres, the environment hasn't just died, it's changed into something else entirely. Players have started calling these mutation zones, and they're absolutely fascinating from a lore perspective, even though they're terrifying to explore. The first thing you notice when entering a mutation zone is that the geometry feels wrong. Rock formations twist in ways that don't match normal geological processes, creating spirals and angular patterns that look almost architectural but clearly aren't human-made. Plant life, what little exists, grows in crystalline structures rather than organic shapes, with leaves and stems that look more like geometric fractals than anything biological. The few animals spotted in these zones move strangely, their locomotion jerky and precise, like they're following programmed paths rather than natural instincts. The colour palette shifts too, with an overabundance of colours that seem slightly off, purples and greens that are too saturated, blues that hurt to look at directly. Some players report visual distortions or strange artifacts in their displays when spending time in mutation zones, glitches that could be intentional design choices or could represent something affecting the player character's perception directly. The in-game explanation, based on scattered scientific notes and radar observations, is that the exotic matter the ARC process and use for power doesn't just provide energy, it fundamentally alters the structure of reality in localized areas. The matter itself exists partially outside normal space-time, and when concentrated in large quantities, it causes the surrounding environment to become unstable, to start reflecting the geometric and physical laws of wherever the exotic matter originates from. So mutation zones aren't contaminated in a conventional sense. They're being overwritten, transformed into regions where the rules governing matter and energy are different from the rest of Earth. This has profound implications for what the ARC are actually doing. If every facility they build creates a mutation zone, and if those zones are slowly expanding as more exotic matter is processed and concentrated, then the machines aren't just harvesting Earth, they're terraforming it, changing the fundamental nature of the planet to match the dimensional space where the exotic matter comes from. Eventually, if this process continues unchecked, the entire planet will become a mutation zone, a place where human biology can't function and human consciousness can't exist in any recognizable form. The ARC would be perfectly fine in such an environment, since they're already built to process exotic matter and operate in areas where normal physics breaks down. But biological life, anything evolved to exist in standard space-time with normal causality and thermodynamics, would simply cease to be viable. This realization completely changes the stakes of the story. The Vanguard Initiative might have thought they were just harvesting resources and accepting ecological damage as an unfortunate cost, but what they actually unleashed was a transformation process that will eventually make Earth completely alien, hostile to all forms of terrestrial life. Even if humanity defeats the ARC, even if we shut down every foundry and dismantle every walker, the mutation zones would continue expanding. The exotic matter already introduced to the environment would keep warping reality until nothing remains that we would recognize as Earth. The only way to stop this process would be to somehow remove or neutralize the exotic matter, to reverse the dimensional contamination, and there's no evidence that such reversal is even theoretically possible. Several archivist scientists have written papers speculating about potential solutions. One suggests using the ARC's own technology against them, processing exotic matter in reverse, to extract it from the environment and contain it somewhere where it can't affect normal space. Another proposes finding the dimensional gateway or portal through which exotic matter enters our reality and closing it, cutting off the source of contamination. A third, more radical proposal suggests that humanity needs to abandon physical form entirely, uploading consciousness into computer systems or energy matrices that can exist in the mutated environment, essentially becoming digital entities that aren't constrained by biology or physics. That last option sounds disturbingly similar to what the Vanguard Initiative might be planning with their consciousness generators, which raises the question of whether they understood this problem from the beginning and designed their solution accordingly. Maybe Project Exodus wasn't about escaping to another dimension, but about transforming humanity into a form that could survive in the mutated Earth that the exotic matter harvesting would inevitably create. The translation vessels and consciousness generators wouldn't transport people anywhere. They'd convert human minds into patterns that could exist in the transformed environment, achieving immortality or at least persistence at the cost of everything we understand as human experience. If this interpretation is correct, then the Vanguard Initiative was never planning to abandon Earth at all. They were planning to inherit it, to become the dominant form of consciousness in a world remade by exotic matter, a world where biological humans couldn't survive, but digital or energy-based entities could thrive indefinitely. The billions left behind weren't being sacrificed so the elite could escape. They were being sacrificed so the elite could stay, transformed into something that would own and control a planet that nobody else could inhabit. This would explain Director Voss's increasingly grandiose language about destiny and transformation, about how future generations would understand and appreciate the necessity of his choices. He wasn't talking about distant descendants living on colony ships. He was talking about himself and his fellow initiative members becoming immortal godlike beings ruling over a transformed Earth, with the consciousness generators providing an infinite workforce of processed human minds to serve their purposes. It's the ultimate expression of elite contempt for the masses, not just abandoning them, but literally reshaping reality to ensure they can never exist in the same space, creating a world where inequality isn't just economic or political, but fundamental to the nature of existence itself. The mutation zones are the visible evidence of this transformation, early-stage prototypes of what the entire planet will eventually become. Raiders who venture into these zones and survive, who manage to navigate the twisted geometry and altered physics long enough to scavenge what they need, they're essentially travelling forward in time, seeing the future that awaits Earth if the Vanguard Initiative's plan reaches completion. And what they find in those zones isn't just strange or unsettling, it's hostile to human existence in ways that go beyond physical danger. Several raiders have reported psychological effects from extended exposure to mutation zones, difficulty maintaining coherent thoughts, memories that seem to belong to someone else, a persistent feeling that they're being watched or evaluated by something invisible. The adapters, with their focus on observation and documentation, have noted that these psychological effects intensify near the largest concentrations of exotic matter, particularly around the massive structures being built in the assembly yards. They've theorized that the exotic matter doesn't just alter physical reality, but also affects consciousness directly, that spending time near these structures gradually rewrites human neural patterns to align with whatever dimensional space the matter comes from. If you stay too long, you start thinking in ways that aren't quite human anymore, perceiving realities that don't exist in normal space-time, becoming something hybrid, something that exists partially in our dimension and partially in the exotic matter dimension. Some raiders who've been extensively exposed to mutation zones never fully recover. They speak in fragmented sentences about things they've seen or understood, about patterns underlying reality that can't be expressed in human language, about the futility of resistance against something that operates on scales humans can't comprehend. The other survivors treat them with a mixture of pity and fear, knowing that they've been fundamentally changed by what they experienced, that they're no longer fully human, even if their bodies appear unchanged. These changed individuals sometimes wander back toward mutation zones, drawn by something they can't explain or resist, and they're never seen again. The assumption is that they're absorbed into whatever exists in those zones, their consciousness integrated into the larger pattern that the exotic matter represents. It's a horrifying fate, losing yourself not through death but through transformation into something incomprehensible, and it serves as a powerful deterrent keeping most survivors away from the most heavily mutated areas. But some raiders, particularly those desperate for resources or driven by curiosity, continue venturing into these zones despite the risks. They wear improvised protective gear, try to limit their exposure time, and work in pairs or groups so someone can pull them out if they start showing signs of psychological contamination. The materials and technology available in mutation zones are often far more advanced than what can be scavenged elsewhere. Components that seem to operate on principles that shouldn't be possible, power sources that never deplete, tools that respond to thought rather than physical manipulation. These exotic items are incredibly valuable for trade and can provide significant advantages in combat or survival, which is why people keep taking the risk despite knowing what might happen. There's a tragic irony in this: humans scavenging the instruments of their own transformation, using technology that's slowly rewriting them to survive long enough to be more thoroughly rewritten. It's a microcosm of the broader human relationship with technology, adopting tools that change us in ways we don't fully understand, because the immediate benefits outweigh the long-term risks. And by the time we realise the full extent of what we've done to ourselves, it's too late to go back. We've already been transformed in ways that make our previous existence impossible or undesirable. The mutation zones also attract a specific type of researcher, people who are fascinated rather than repelled by the transformation, who see the exotic matter contamination not as a threat but as an opportunity. These individuals, sometimes called transcenders by other survivors, believe that human evolution has stagnated and that exposure to exotic matter represents the next step in our development, a chance to become something greater than what we are. They deliberately spend time in mutation zones, documenting their experiences and the changes they undergo, trying to guide the transformation rather than resist it. The transcenders have established small communities on the edges of the most severe mutation zones, settlements that look increasingly alien as the residents transform. Their architecture incorporates exotic matter principles, buildings that seem to exist in more dimensions than they should, spaces that are larger on the inside than the outside, doorways that lead to places they shouldn't connect to. Visitors report feeling disoriented and disturbed by these communities, like they're seeing something human minds weren't meant to perceive, but the transcenders themselves seem content, even euphoric, convinced that they're pioneering a new form of existence that will eventually replace biological humanity entirely. Whether the transcenders are visionaries or victims of exotic matter-induced delusion is hotly debated among other survivors. Some argue that they're making the best of an inevitable situation, choosing to embrace transformation rather than futilely resisting it. Others see them as cautionary tales, examples of how exposure to exotic matter destroys human judgment and identity, turning people into evangelists for their own extinction. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, as it often does with these complex situations. The transcenders have certainly been changed by their exposure, their thought patterns and perceptions altered in ways that make them incompatible with baseline human consciousness. But they're also developing genuine insights into the nature of exotic matter and the dimensional spaces it connects to, knowledge that could be valuable for understanding or combating the ARC's ultimate purpose. One transcender community maintains a database of observations and theories about the mutation zones that's far more comprehensive than anything the archivists have compiled. They describe the geometric patterns as language or mathematics, symbolic systems that encode information about the structure of reality in dimensions humans don't normally perceive. They've attempted to decode these patterns, to translate them into forms that human minds can process. And while their results are fragmentary and often incomprehensible, they've made some disturbing discoveries. According to the Transcenders research, the patterns aren't random results of exotic matter contamination, but deliberate constructions. Information being written into the fabric of space-time itself. The ARC aren't just building physical structures, they're creating dimensional architecture, frameworks that will persist long after the machines themselves cease functioning. And these frameworks appear to be components of something larger, pieces of a structure that spans multiple dimensions and will only become fully visible or functional when enough pieces are assembled. The Transcenders believe this structure is a kind of beacon or gateway, a construction designed to facilitate the arrival of whatever consciousness or entity exists in the exotic matter dimension. The cosmic anomaly detected by the Vanguard initiative isn't travelling through normal space toward Earth. It's being pulled here through dimensional tunnels that the ARC are constructing, drawn by the beacon of exotic matter and transformed reality that's being built on our planet. In this interpretation, the ARC aren't preparing Earth for harvest or transformation for its own sake. They're preparing it as a receiving station, a place where the anomaly can fully manifest and establish permanent presence. Once the beacon is complete, once enough of Earth has been transformed into mutation zones, with the proper geometric configurations, the anomaly will arrive not as an external threat but as an inhabiting consciousness, spreading through the prepared framework, like data being loaded into a computer system. And at that point, Earth won't just be changed or destroyed, it will become something else entirely, a node in whatever larger structure or network the anomaly represents. This is by far the darkest interpretation of the law we've encountered, suggesting that humanity's fate was sealed the moment the Vanguard initiative deployed the ARC, that every action taken since then has only accelerated our transformation into something that serves purposes we can't comprehend.